The San Antonio Spurs, a 13.5 point underdog, go into Philadelphia on the second night of a back-to-back and end up coming out with a 9 point win, their best win of the season, if this early season for the San Antonio Spurs. Let's go through a quick recap of this game. This is obviously the Sixers are expected to be a title contender. The Spurs were projected by Vegas to have the worst record in the league by the end of the year, and it's only 3 games in, but the Spurs have been really competitive here in these first 3 games, aside from that Charlotte game, and they end up knocking off the Sixers at home in Philly. So let's go through a by quarter analysis here of this game. So I'm going to go through some notes, and I have here on the screen each quarter for the game. So in the first quarter, the Philly wins this one by 6 points, 25-19. Just some of my notes that I wrote was that both teams were very competitive here. It was really tough for either team to get good quality shots. They were really contesting each other's shots. Both offenses kind of struggled here in that first quarter, and both teams had a good defensive quarter. We did see, though, with Joel Embiid on the floor for this for Philadelphia, that Coach Pop needed to have more big men on the floor. So we saw Isaiah Roby get some early minutes there in the first quarter, and so did Gorgie Jang. And then Philly was a +8 after the first quarter in the paint, but they won that quarter by 6. Then we go to the second quarter, and this is the Devin Vassell show. In the second quarter, Devin Vassell went off. He went off for 17 points. So he goes off for 17 there. As you can see, he goes perfect from the floor, 7-7 from the floor. Just some notes that I made. He was attacking the Sixers defense in so many different ways. He was cutting. There was a play where he acted like he was going to come up for a dribble handoff, and he goes backdoor, and Gorgie Jang finds him for a bounce pass, and he dunks it through 2 Philly defenders. He had his mid-range jumper going. He had his spot of 3 going. And so he was really impressive in that second quarter with 17 points. And that's good to see that early, in just 3 games, he's already having these kind of individual quarters for San Antonio. So then the Spurs, they end up leading by 3 points going into halftime over the 76ers. So the Spurs take the lead into the half. Third quarter comes, and Keita Bates-Diop now joins the group. Coach Pop puts him in as well to get some minutes. For most of that quarter, it was pretty competitive between both teams in the third. But then Keldon Johnson gets hot for the Spurs, and he ends up with 9 points there in the third quarter. And when the Spurs actually built their first double-digit lead there in the third quarter, and by the time the whistle blows after the third, it's the Spurs by 8. And then comes the fourth quarter. Now, against Indiana, we saw that the Pacers really put pressure on the Spurs with their inbounding tactics toward the middle of the court, and also using the hack-a-yak strategy. The Spurs were able to answer Philadelphia here in the fourth, and they basically were competitive back and forth. But the Spurs did find the answers. One of the players that really helped San Antonio steer the ship and make sure that they don't struggle as much down the stretch was Trey Jones. He ends up with 10 points in this quarter to lead the Spurs. Philly was putting him on the free throw line because when they were trying to stop the game late, and he still knocked down four free throws there. He also had 3 assists for the team. And one thing that you want to credit the Spurs for is that they really responded. Philly came out in that fourth quarter with a 9-0 run, and it looked like, oh, here we go, like that those contending Sixers are going to go ahead and try to beat these Spurs, who are supposed to be a lottery team. And then the Spurs responded. These young Spurs, they actually responded with a 10-4 response, and then midway to the quarter, they're up by 7, and they were basically able to hold that lead there. And you kind of knew, like, with 2 minutes left, like, this one's kind of over. Like, Philly's actually going to lose to the Spurs, and they're going to be 0-3 for the year. And just some things that I noted was Spurs made their free throws there down the stretch. Like I mentioned, Trey Jones was big there. And also they came up with multiple stops. Now, I know Tyrese Maxey got hot there a little bit. He ends up with, 11 points in the fourth, and also Embiid. But the Spurs were getting multiple stops at different times in key moments against the Sixers defense. And so that allowed San Antonio to walk off again with their most, it's crazy to say this, but against the best team they've played, they actually walked off with their most comfortable win by winning the game by 9 points. Again, against Indiana, they barely won that game by 3 points. And then, of course, we know on opening night against Charlotte, they got blown out of the water by 27 points. So, this is a really big win for the Spurs. Let's continue going through this team. As far as what sticks out to me when we look at the shot location box scores for both teams, Philly struggled from 3, as we can see there, but that's good to know for the Spurs' defense, is that not only did Philly struggle from 3, but so did Indiana. So again, it's only been 3 games, but maybe that's something to note when we get to like game 10 to see what is the Spurs' defense actually doing against these teams, or are they just having bad nights shooting the basketball? The Spurs actually had their best night guarding the rim, considering that they're playing an all-star center and MVP candidate in Joel Embiid. They actually held the Sixers to 51% shooting in the paint, so the Sixers barely got over a point per shot there. And then on offense, the Spurs continue to be lights out from 3. They shot 42% tonight. in this game. Again, that's 2 games in a row now that if they're making their threes, they're now 2-0 when they outscore their opponent from 3. They outscored Indiana by 18 points from the 3-point line, and they outscored Philly also by 18 points. They had their mid-range jumpers going there. You can see they're 50%. And then free throws were crucial, like I mentioned, and the Spurs did a great job here. They made 80% of their free throws, 12 of 15. They didn't get out of the fast break, but again, it was enough. They still held on for the win. And then they also, I'm going to mention this toward the end, but the Spurs did a great job, their best job so far this season, of not turning the ball over. And so, of course, that doesn't, the Sixers weren't able to get as many points off turnovers if the Spurs were taking care of the basketball. And then you kind of see where the scoring difference came down to. It was mainly that the jumpers, the Spurs had really good shooting night for themselves from 3 and from mid-range. And the Sixers more so dominated there at the free throw line with 21 to 12 in the free throws. And then and then on twos, I mean, they were basically even, both teams. All right, so let's look at your leading scorers for this game. It was Devin Vassell finishes as the top scorer with 22 points. Again, it was mainly that second quarter where he really went off for 17 points. He was kind of quiet there in the second half, but again, the Sixers were more so focused on him. Going into halftime, they knew that he was right against them, so they schemed more so to try to limit him. Keldon Johnson had finishes with another 20-point night, so he has 21 points on this night, 9 points from 3, 6 points in the half court. We got to continue to see that Keldon and Devin, they're starting to, be able to create some of their own shots at times in certain moments in the half court. And that was a big concern with DeJounte Murray gone, was can Devin and Keldon handle that? And at different moments in this game, they actually did show that. I mean, I remember it was a play, I think it was in the fourth quarter or late in the third, where Devin was able to get like the Sixers were really just holding the Spurs. They couldn't really get anything, and Devin was able to create on his own. Like he used his little step back in the mid-range, and he sunk a shot. Trey Jones continues to be aggressive attacking the defense. I mean, 10 points again in the paint now, 5 points at the free throw line. And like I mentioned, the fourth quarter, he was crucial for the Spurs. Doug McDermott got hot off the bench, and there was a moment that's where he was kind of ruining the Sixers' momentum. Every time they would try to make a comeback, Doug would hit a 3 against them, and so he ends up with 12 of his 14 points from the 3-point line. Jakob Poeltl, I mean, yes, he had to guard Joel Embiid goes for 40 points, but Jakob was also giving the Sixers defense some fits at times near the rim in the paint, where he had 12 of his points in the paint. And then Josh Richardson had a good night as well, shooting the 3. He had 6 points, and he finishes with 11 off the bench. So those are some of your leading scorers. As far as the Sixers, Embiid goes off for 40, 20 points in the paint and 12 from the free throw line. He was a problem, but he's not just a problem for the Spurs. He's a problem for every team in the NBA. Tyrese Maxey also has 25 points there. But again, the Spurs did enough they were able to win by 9 points. Who are your standout players? The players who really stick out is a lot of the players I mentioned. Devin Vassell tops out as the top player here. Then Jakob Poeltl, Keldon Johnson, Trey Jones, Doug McDermott, and Josh Richardson. One player who I want to mention, who he didn't score a lot of points or grab a lot of rebounds, but he was moving the ball and really seeing where the Sixers defense was having some breakdowns, and that was Gorgui Dieng. He ends up with just off the bench in 13 minutes. He ends up with 5 assists as a team leader there. In assists was Gorgui Dieng, and so those are some of the key players there for the Spurs. Now that we've gotten three games through the season, we can kind of look at, how are the Spurs comparing against themselves in each game, what stats are kind of sticking out. And so I found 3 key stats that really stuck out to me after this game against the Sixers. One was the turnovers. This is the Spurs only turned the ball over 14 times tonight. Again, that is their best mark of the season. I do expect them to bring that turnovers number down, because that's kind of what every Coach Pop team does. They're just really well coached. They take care of the basketball. The quote is always like, they don't beat themselves. And so tonight was one of those examples where the Spurs weren't beating themselves. They didn't turn the ball over 17 times or 15 times like they did in their first 2 games. And so when they're not turning the ball over, well, then it's harder for the defense to try to get if the Spurs are playing good defense on the other end, then it's hard for the teams to really try to stop them at different times in games. Another stat that I wrote down was that the Spurs had their best defensive game because they held Philly below 30 points in every quarter of this game. They hadn't done that yet in a game this season, hold an opponent below 30 in every quarter. They did that tonight against Philly. And then also, they were making sure the Sixers didn't get many second chances by having their best night of the opponents getting offensive rebounds. Philly only grabbed 12 offensive rebounds, which is a season low for a Spurs opponent. And of course, 14 second chance points is also a season low for a Spurs opponent. So those are some of the things that stuck out to me from the Spurs when you look at their stat sheet. So again, it's only 3 games. The Spurs, who are supposed to win 22 games, they're on pace for 55 wins. I know it's just a small sample size. It's not going to hold, but again, this team is showing one thing. It's that if you're not ready and you're not ready to compete, and they start getting better as far as running the fast break, not turning the ball over, and then their half court defense is pretty good there, like we saw tonight. This team is they can get some wins even against good opponents like we saw there. So let's see what happens going forward. They play now Monday in Minnesota. For Project Spurs, I am Paul Garcia.